I want you to pause for a moment and really sit with the gravity of what is unfolding right now. Because this is not just another story about technology sector growth in a foreign country, not just another example of regional tech hubs emerging to complement established centers of innovation. And certainly not just another incremental shift in where artificial intelligence research and development occurs within the global technology ecosystem. What we are witnessing is the release of data 1 minute ago from the Technology Industry Association, showing that Canadian AI companies attracted $67 billion in venture capital investment in 2024, surpassing Silicon Valley's $52 billion for the first time in history, and that Canada now hosts 23 of the world's 100 most valuable AI startups, compared to just 7 2 years ago, representing a complete transformation in the geography of AI innovation that is directly attributable to Canadian government policy decisions providing regulatory certainty, immigration pathways for AI talent, and research funding that American policy chaos and American visa restrictions have made impossible to match. I have spent decades watching power from the inside. First, as a Republican operative who helped construct policy frameworks around technology competitiveness, innovation policy, and the strategic importance of maintaining American leadership in emerging technologies that will define economic and military power for generations. Then, as a constitutional lawyer who has litigated cases about intellectual property, technology regulation, and the constitutional boundaries of federal authority over innovation and over the conditions that enable technological advancement. And I can tell you with absolute certainty, what the investment data reveals is not temporary fluctuation in capital flows that will reverse when market conditions normalize, or short-term advantage that Canada has captured through unsustainable subsidies. It is a fundamental shift in where the most important technology of the 21st century is being developed, driven by Canadian success in creating ecosystem conditions that attract talent and capital, while American policy failures in immigration, in research funding, and in regulatory coherence have made the United States increasingly unattractive location for AI innovation, despite America's historical advantages in technology development. So I want you to ask yourself 3 questions. First, what happens when artificial intelligence, the technology that will determine which countries lead economically and militarily over the next 50 years, increasingly concentrates in Canada rather than in the United States, because Canadian immigration policies welcome the global AI talent that American visa restrictions exclude, because Canadian research funding provides stability that American budget chaos doesn't match, and because Canadian regulatory frameworks provide clarity that American political fights over AI governance cannot achieve. Second, what happens when the major AI companies emerging in Canada aren't building research centers that will eventually move to Silicon Valley, but are instead establishing permanent headquarters in Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, with explicit commitments to remaining Canadian companies, specifically because founders and investors have concluded that Canadian policy environment is superior to American alternatives? And third, what happens when Chinese technology companies, facing American restrictions on their access to American AI technology and American AI talent, increasingly partner with Canadian AI firms to access capabilities they can no longer obtain from American sources, creating technology transfer relationships between Canada and China that give Chinese military and intelligence services access to AI advances that American export controls were designed to deny them? These are not theoretical questions. These are being answered right now in real time in decisions by AI researchers choosing to accept positions at Canadian universities and Canadian companies rather than at American institutions that historically dominated AI talent recruitment. In venture capital allocation decisions, where investors are concluding that Canadian AI investments offer better risk-adjusted returns than American alternatives due to policy stability and talent availability. and in national security assessments in Washington, where officials are belatedly recognizing that American technology leadership that has been foundation of American economic and military dominance for 70 years is eroding due to policy failures that have made America less competitive than it needs to be in technologies that will define future power. For more than 50 years, since the early development of computer science and since American universities and American companies established dominance in emerging information technologies, the United States had maintained overwhelming leadership in technology innovation through combination of factors that created ecosystem advantages no other country could match. American universities attracted the world's best researchers and students through reputation, through funding, through academic freedom. American companies provided opportunities for technology commercialization that allowed innovations developed in university labs to become products serving global markets. American venture capital provided financing for startups that took risks other financial systems wouldn't support. American immigration policies, while imperfect, generally allowed talented individuals from around the world to come to America, to study at American universities, to work at American companies, and often to remain permanently and to become American citizens, contributing to American innovation. American regulatory frameworks, while sometimes burdensome, generally provided enough clarity that companies could build businesses without constant uncertainty about whether regulations would change unpredictably. American government research funding through agencies including NSF, NIH, DARPA, and others provided baseline support for fundamental research that enabled breakthroughs that commercial funding alone wouldn't support. The combination of these factors created self-reinforcing ecosystem where talent attracted capital, capital enabled innovation, innovation attracted more talent, and the cycle continued in ways that made American technology dominance essentially unassailable, despite periodic concerns about Japanese competition in 1980s or about Chinese advances more recently. The ecosystem had been particularly strong in artificial intelligence, which emerged as distinct field in 1950s at American universities, and which had been dominated by American researchers and American companies throughout its history. The major breakthroughs in AI, including neural networks, machine learning, deep learning, large language models, had occurred at American universities, including MIT, Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, or at American companies, including Google, OpenAI, Meta. The leading AI researchers were predominantly either American or were immigrants who had come to America for education and had remained for opportunities American ecosystem provided. The major AI companies serving global markets were American, with valuations that dwarfed competitors from other countries. American dominance had seemed so secure that policymakers across multiple administrations had taken it for granted as permanent feature of technology landscape, rather than as contingent advantage that required maintenance through policies that preserved ecosystem conditions enabling innovation. That complacency has proven catastrophically mistaken as policy failures over past several years, accelerating dramatically over past 18 months, have systematically degraded the American advantages that had made US the natural home for AI development. American immigration policies had shifted from welcoming talented individuals to making visa processes so uncertain and so difficult that international AI researchers and engineers increasingly chose to pursue opportunities in other countries rather than fighting American bureaucratic systems that might reject their applications or might provide only temporary visas, creating constant uncertainty about whether they could remain. American universities, which had always attracted international graduate students in computer science and AI, found that visa restrictions and processing delays meant that talented students were increasingly accepting positions at Canadian or European universities rather than waiting months or years for American visa approvals that might never come. American companies found that hiring international AI talent required navigating visa processes that were slower and more uncertain than processes in Canada or in other countries, putting American companies at competitive disadvantage when recruiting globally for positions requiring specialized expertise that domestic American talent pool couldn't fully supply. American research funding, which had been stable for decades, became subject to political fights over federal budgets that created uncertainty about whether grants would be renewed, whether programs would continue, whether research that began with federal support would have funding to reach conclusions. The uncertainty affected American universities' ability to plan long-term research programs and affected researchers' willingness to commit to American institutions when funding stability was better in countries with less polarized political systems. American regulatory frameworks for AI, rather than providing clarity that would allow companies to build businesses with confidence about rules they needed to follow, became battleground where different political factions fought over issues including bias, transparency, safety, with result that companies faced uncertainty about what regulations would emerge and whether AI systems developed under one set of assumptions would be legal under regulations that might be imposed later. The accumulated effect of these policy failures was that Canada, which had historically been a minor player in AI innovation, suddenly possessed comparative advantages that made it more attractive location for AI development than United States, despite America's historical dominance and despite America's vastly larger market and larger capital base. Canadian immigration policies for AI talent were clear, fast, and welcoming. Canada had created specific visa categories for technology workers that provided processing in weeks rather than months, provided pathways to permanent residence that gave immigrants certainty they could build long-term careers in Canada, and explicitly communicated that Canada wanted to attract global talent that would contribute to Canadian technology sector. The contrast with American visa uncertainty was so stark that AI researchers and engineers who would have strongly preferred to work in the United States due to ecosystem advantages were nevertheless choosing Canada because certainty of being able to live and work there exceeded value of American advantages that they might not be able to access if visa applications were rejected. Canadian research funding for AI had been stable, substantial, and strategic. Canadian government had designated AI as national priority and had provided sustained funding through programs including Vector Institute in Toronto, Mila in Montreal, Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute, that provided resources for fundamental research without the political uncertainty that affected American programs. Canadian universities leveraged this funding to recruit top researchers, including several who had previously worked at American universities, but who moved to Canada for better research environments. Canadian regulatory approach to AI emphasized enabling innovation while developing frameworks addressing legitimate concerns about safety and about bias, but did so through consultative processes with industry that provided clarity rather than through political combat that created uncertainty. Canadian companies could develop AI systems with reasonable confidence about what regulatory requirements they would face, while American companies faced uncertainty about whether regulations would emerge that would require expensive modifications or would prohibit approaches they had invested in developing. Most significantly, Canadian government had made strategic decision to position Canada as bridge between American and Chinese AI ecosystems in ways that attracted investment from both. At time when American-Chinese technology decoupling meant American AI companies faced restrictions on Chinese market access, and Chinese AI companies faced restrictions on American technology and American talent, Canada offered location where talent could collaborate regardless of national origin, where technology could be developed without export control complications that affected American research, and where companies could access capital from American venture funds, from Canadian sources, and from Asian investors without political complications. The positioning was strategically sophisticated and reflected Canadian assessment that AI development required global talent collaboration that American policy was making impossible within American borders, but that could occur in Canada without political constraints. Within 2 years of Canadian policies creating these ecosystem advantages, effects on AI industry geography became visible. Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver emerged as major AI research centers with university programs that rivaled Stanford and MIT in attracting top students and researchers. Canadian AI companies that had been unknown internationally became valuable startups attracting major venture investment. International AI researchers who would have automatically chosen American universities and American companies in previous era were increasingly choosing Canadian alternatives that offered competitive compensation, excellent research environments, immigration certainty, and the opportunity to work with global collaborators without visa complications. American AI companies began establishing Canadian research operations not as peripheral offices, but as major centers where substantial portions of their research occurred, specifically because Canadian operations could hire international talent that American visa restrictions made unavailable for American locations. The investment data released 1 minute ago quantifying these shifts revealed how dramatic the transformation had been. Canadian AI companies raising $67 billion in venture capital in 2024 represented 650% increase from 2 years earlier when Canadian AI investment had been only $10 billion. The growth wasn't just Canadian companies receiving more funding, it was fundamentally more valuable AI companies being created in Canada. Of the 23 Canadian companies now among world's 100 most valuable AI startups, 19 had been founded in past 2 years, meaning they were explicitly Canadian companies rather than companies that had migrated from elsewhere. Silicon Valley venture capital that had declined from $91 billion in 2022 to $52 billion in 2024 reflected not just overall venture capital decline affecting all sectors, but reflected specific AI investment shifting to Canada as investors concluded Canadian ecosystem was more attractive for AI specifically, even though Silicon Valley maintained advantages in other technology sectors. The data revealed that founders with choices about where to locate were increasingly choosing Canada, and investors were following founders to Canadian locations that previously would have been considered inferior to Silicon Valley alternatives. Within minutes of investment data being released, effects began cascading through technology industry and through policy circles in ways that revealed how significant Canadian AI emergence was and how much American policy failures had contributed to American competitive decline. In Silicon Valley, reaction was combination of alarm at Canadian competition and frustration at American policies that had made Canadian alternative viable. Technology executives speaking to media noted that they had been warning for years that American immigration restrictions and American research funding uncertainty would damage American AI competitiveness, and that Canadian investment data provided quantitative confirmation of damage that had been qualitatively obvious to anyone working in the AI field. Several prominent AI researchers issued open letter calling on Congress to address immigration policies and research funding stability before American AI leadership eroded further. When a factory stops, there's no narrative that fixes it. But when global capital and global talent conclude that Canada offers better environment for developing the technology that will define economic and military power for next 50 years, and when that conclusion drives permanent shift in where AI innovation occurs, you're watching American technology dominance that has been foundation of American economic and military power since World War II being voluntarily surrendered through policy failures that make America uncompetitive in the technologies that matter most. In Washington, reaction revealed belated recognition of problem accompanied by limited understanding of how to address it. National Security Council staff convened emergency meetings to assess implications of Canadian AI emergence for American technology leadership and for American military advantages that depend on maintaining AI superiority over potential adversaries. Department of Commerce officials expressed concern that Canadian AI growth was occurring partly through partnerships with Chinese companies and Chinese investors that provided technology transfer pathways American export controls had been designed to prevent. But the policy discussions revealed fundamental tensions that made addressing Canadian competition extremely difficult. Immigration restrictions that were driving AI talent to Canada were politically popular with Republican base and were defended by Trump administration as essential to protecting American workers. Research funding increases that would match Canadian stability required congressional appropriations that were impossible given political fights over federal spending. Regulatory clarity that would match Canadian advantages required political compromises between factions that viewed AI regulation completely differently and that couldn't agree on frameworks. The result was that American officials recognized Canadian AI emergence as a strategic problem, but had no politically feasible solutions that would restore American ecosystem advantages. In Canada, reaction to investment data was celebration of policy success and validation of strategic positioning as AI Innovation Center. Prime Minister Carney issued statement noting that Canadian AI industry growth demonstrated that Canada can compete with and surpass any country when Canadian government provides policy environment that enables innovation and when Canada leverages advantages including diverse talent, stable governance, and strategic positioning between major economic powers. The statement explicitly contrasted Canadian policy success with American policy failures while avoiding direct criticism of Trump, allowing data to speak for itself about which country's policies were more effective at enabling AI innovation. Canadian technology industry leaders noted that AI success was creating broader technology ecosystem benefits as companies and investors that came to Canada for AI opportunities discovered advantages that would benefit other technology sectors, potentially making Canada a major technology center rather than just AI specialist location. What makes this moment particularly significant for American strategic position is understanding how Canadian AI emergence affects not just commercial technology competition, but affects American military advantages and American national security that depend on maintaining technology leadership over potential adversaries. For 70 years, American military dominance had been based partly on technology advantages, including in information technology, computing, sensors, communications, that gave American forces capabilities adversaries couldn't match. Those technology advantages had depended on American commercial technology sector being world leader in relevant technologies, providing innovations that could be adapted for military applications and providing industrial base that could produce military systems incorporating cutting-edge technologies. Artificial intelligence is and will be most important military technology of next 50 years, affecting everything from autonomous systems to intelligence analysis, to command and control, to logistics, to weapons targeting. American military planning assumes American forces will have AI advantages over potential adversaries that will offset adversaries' advantages in numbers or in other areas. Those AI advantages depend on American commercial AI sector maintaining technology leadership that provides innovations military can leverage. If Canadian AI sector surpasses American sector in AI capabilities, and if Canadian companies partner with Chinese firms in ways that provide technology transfer, American military AI advantages erode while Chinese military AI capabilities advance, fundamentally changing military balance in ways that affect American security. You can't maintain military technology advantages when commercial technology sector that provides innovations has moved to allied country whose partnerships with your primary competitor provide them access to technologies your export controls were supposed to deny them. You can't reverse technology leadership shifts through policy changes alone because technology ecosystems have network effects and path dependencies where talent attracts capital, capital enables innovation, innovation attracts more talent in self-reinforcing cycles that compound advantages once they develop. American AI ecosystem took decades to build through accumulated advantages that had made America a natural home for AI innovation. Canadian AI ecosystem has reached scale where similar self-reinforcing dynamics are operating, and reversing shift would require American policy changes so dramatic and so sustained that they exceed realistic political possibilities given American political polarization and given that required changes contradict positions that major political factions have committed to defending. Immigration reform to match Canadian welcome for AI talent requires congressional legislation that is impossible given Republican opposition to expanded immigration, regardless of economic arguments. Research funding stability requires budget processes that function predictably rather than through continuing resolutions and shutdown threats, which requires political compromises current American political system cannot achieve. Regulatory clarity requires political agreement on AI governance principles that doesn't exist and that won't emerge while AI policy is battleground for broader political conflicts about technology, about China, about role of government. The result is that Canadian advantages in AI ecosystem are likely to persist and compound, while American disadvantages continue damaging American competitiveness in ways that policy system cannot address. This affects American economic competitiveness when the technology that will drive productivity growth and economic value over the next 50 years increasingly develops in Canada rather than United States, generating Canadian wealth and Canadian jobs rather than American equivalents. It affects American military advantages when AI capabilities that American forces depend on for maintaining dominance develop elsewhere and potentially transfer to adversaries through Canadian partnerships American policy cannot control. It affects American strategic position when technology leadership that has been foundation of American power for 70 years shifts to allied country whose relationship with United States has deteriorated due to American policy decisions. It affects American influence globally when other countries conclude American technology dominance is ending and that alternative technology centers in Canada or elsewhere offer opportunities for accessing cutting-edge technologies without depending on American companies or American policy approval. The abstraction of technology competitiveness becomes concrete when AI companies that would have been Silicon Valley startups are instead Toronto companies generating Canadian wealth. When AI researchers who would have worked at American universities work at Canadian institutions advancing Canadian capabilities. When military AI systems incorporate technologies developed in Canada and potentially shared with Chinese partners rather than technologies developed in America under American control. When American strategic position erodes as technology advantages that enabled American dominance disappear due to policy failures that made America uncompetitive in technologies that matter most. The tragedy is American AI decline and Canadian AI emergence result entirely from American policy choices that were avoidable and that were predicted to damage American competitiveness by experts whose warnings were ignored. Immigration restrictions that drive AI talent to Canada serve no genuine American interest and damage American technology sector that depends on global talent. Research funding instability that makes Canadian programs more attractive than American alternatives results from political dysfunction that could be addressed through basic competence in budget processes. Regulatory uncertainty that advantages Canadian companies over American competitors results from treating AI policy as political battlefield rather than as strategic challenge requiring coherent frameworks. Every element of American AI decline is self-inflicted and results from policy failures rather than from Canadian advantages that America couldn't match if American policy functioned competently.